my advice to all first timers is you're probably going to fail. Don't burn relationships in order to get your startup together, because you're going to need, the relationships are actually way more important than the startup, because the startup will probably fail, and those relationships you're really going to need then going forward.
What's up, techies? We've got a really interesting episode for you today as we're speaking to the founders of Startup News, Patrick Green, Marcus Holmes and Charlie Gunningham.
Startup News is the home of West Australian startup news and events, and has been publishing daily articles on news, opinions and interviews with Australian innovators and startups since 2013.
Startup News is a beacon for the West Australian startup scene, and its origin story is a startup tale all on its own.
Hey, Charlie.
Hey, how are you?
I'm good. Hey, Patrick.
You're looking very
there.
beardy.
How you doing?
Alex. Very beardy.
I've
not seen that before.
I haven't seen my barber in 2 months, so
It's not safe to look good.
yeah, I can actually tie my hair up as well. It's Hey, Marcus.
Hey, how you going? Just trying to work out camera angles here.
Well, it's supposed to be a podcast, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Exactly.
Yeah, we're recording.
Yeah.
So I guess we'll just start with intros. Patrick, if you want to go first, just a quick.
Yeah, sure. I don't know where to start. Patrick, obviously, don't know. I'm an IT guy, been around different things for a number of years, and I guess around the startup scene, it kind of came about 2010. I did my first startup and started getting involved in the Perth startup scene, and just worked through E-Group and Morning Startup when we started in Subi, and then went on from there and just kept doing startup things. Launched Startup News in about 2014, and just kept in the startup scene since then, and left the corporate addiction, and now just working purely in the startup space. So yeah, having a ball. It's really good.
I must confess, I thought Startup News was older. So there you go. I think that's a testament to how quickly Startup News kind of dominated that space. There's no one else really covering it.
No, well, 6th of November 2013 was the very first post, and I think Charlie was in WA Business News at the time, and trying to get some articles on startups in, and I wanted to focus on something fully. I think Justin and a few other guys had tried to get some sort of startup feeds happening, but there wasn't really much dedicated to the space, and so that's what brought it about. I was in the Morning Startup group and said to the guys, do you want to get involved? And they're like, nah, too much work. And, they were right.
Yeah.
Absolutely, they were right. And I think the journey sort of proved that. The first year I sort of burnt myself out, had a bunch of help, and then some kind of handballed it to Marcus. And so, we've all had a relay race with this. And
Absolutely. Yeah.
Marcus, you were doing something similar before, and I think that's when you got together with Patrick, right? I'm just a late arrival to this ball. I only came in 2 years ago. So I'm actually fascinated to hear the genesis of it from Marcus and Patrick, because you've got the two co-founders right there.
Well, so Patrick actually started it, and then he came along to Morning Startup, as he said, and said, hey, I'm doing this thing. And I just started perstartupscene.com.
That's right.
But my site was completely shit, and Patrick's way better. So I was like, this is totally pointless. I'll just come and join you. So I ditched Perth Startup Scene, took all the content that I'd written, and then joined Startup News as a co-founder. And we went on from there. And then when Patrick, as he said, burnt out and left, I was left for about 6 months on my own doing it. And then I managed to get Miles on board. And so for about a year and a half, Miles and I did that. And then, it all kind of petered out. And then about 6 months after it just kind of stopped, that's when Charlie got involved and said, no, this is going to happen again.
You hightailed it off to Thailand, didn't you, originally?
Yeah, Miles left, and it was just me again doing this, and it was that was really, I was completely off the scene. I just didn't really want to get involved or do anything.
You were. I remember having a pint with you. I think I was just leaving Business News.
Yeah.
And were we at Fibber McGee's or something in
Yeah,
Leaderville?
something like that. Yeah.
You were literally a few days away from leaving. You'd had enough of the startup scene and lack of support for startup news, and you tried various revenue streams and hadn't really caught on.
And it was just
literally taking your bat and ball and going.
It was just like, that's it, I'm out, I'm gone. No, I mean, the way all of that happened, it was so weird. It was like all my freelance gigs dried up, so I had no real work. My rent on my flat ended.
Oh, damn.
And a friend of mine said, look, I can't afford to pay you Australian rates, but come over to Thailand and I can pay you Thai rates.
I can't afford to pay you Australian rates.
Well, it's kind of weird because it would cost him twice as much and to pay me Australian wages, whereas I was willing to work for a lot less to go over to Thailand. So I said, sure, I'll go and work in Chiang Mai for 6 weeks. And flew over to Chiang Mai and never came back. And that was literally just put everything I owned, like sold everything I didn't want to take with me, bought the largest backpack I could find, poured everything into the largest backpack I could find and left. And an original plan was to come back after 6 weeks with a bit of money, but it was more just like get a break from the whole scene, everything. And then, one thing led to another, and I ended up being CEO of the Phnom Penh Post for a while, thanks to Charlie's intervention. Met an amazing girl, went traveling, carried on traveling, and ended up in Berlin. So yeah.
I feel like there's a lot missed out, like left out of the story.
A couple of pints in between there in some of that.
Oh yeah, stuff like it's been. I mean, and it's really weird. All of that I can trace back to startup news. Like all of that was. I wouldn't have got the job writing for Business News without startup news happening. I wouldn't have got the Phnom Penh job without the experience in startup news, and Charlie's good graces giving me a recommendation, and that wouldn't have led, that would have led to not traveling as much. I would have probably just come back to Perth and feeling a bit dispirited still. And all of that effort that I poured into startup news just paid so much dividends. Like it never made any money for me anyway. Charlie managed to monetize it in about 4 seconds flat.
That sounds like Charlie. Yeah.
Humiliatingly quickly, he managed to turn it into a profitable thing. But yeah, so it wouldn't
have been a product but for you guys and Miles. And Miles, we should say Miles Burke. Anyone who's listening to this wondering who Miles is. BAM Creative and also 6Q, I think, is his startup, right?
Okay, yeah.
Like John's actually met you in the past. You probably don't remember him, but he has a quick story.
The long forgotten past of Marcus Holmes. It was about 5 years ago, Marcus. It was I was at the Learn to Code meetup. I'm not sure if you remember. Space Cube, the very first one. Yeah, I was there, and I met you there.
Cool.
I remember asking about Ruby on Rails, making an MVP. I've come a long way since then. So we're still in the same circles. This is pretty cool.
Yeah, it is. I know that's the other that whole Ruby and Rails girls thing that has now turned into She Codes. That's another one of those amazing stories.
She Codes has gone really big, actually.
Yeah, massive. Yeah,
and it's entirely down to Kate. I had nothing to do with it, but it's
Kate's really got around with it. Yeah.
And as someone who's about to have a daughter, I'm really happy that stuff like that exists. Yeah, it's like.
So you don't have to teach them?
Oh no, I will be. I mean, she's going to get she doesn't know what's in store for her.
My kids are 8 and 11, and I'm glad they have someone else to teach them how to code, so I don't have to come home and do it as well.
I'm going to be reading her. The algorithms Bible right from dot.
Or for bedtime stories.
Yeah.
and the Agile Manifesto or something.
Right from the start. They should get introduced to schools and stuff. Yeah.
I should give you my perspective of startup news on the outside before I got involved in it. I mean, I'd been in a startup for 10 years, and then I sold it to Rewa and ran Rewa.com. And when I was running Rewa.com before I went to Business News, SpaceCube opened. in 2012. The first startup weekend, I think it was September 2012. Marcus, I probably met you there as a fellow mentor. I'd already met Pat at E-Group.
I met you at Ignition.
Yeah, Ignition. I'd met Pat at E-Group. You know, it was the same dozen people, Brody, Sam Birmingham, Claire McGregor, you know, Matt McFarlane, all doing everything, you know, not being paid for it and getting the community going. When we started in 99 doing a .com, there was no community, no co-working space, no dedicated startup news. No one talked about startups. They were known as .coms back then. So I was sort of I felt beholden having done a startup and got out of it to give back to the community. And there was this community developing in Perth's first co-working space and the first startup weekend. I remember going to the startup weekend. Ideas on a Friday were being hacked, and you had products on a Sunday. And Rewa aren't going to listen to this, are they? No. They don't listen to the podcast. I'd go back to Rewa and couldn't get anything done. And I'm going, what is it? There's good talent in Perth.
Yeah.
There's hustlers, there's hackers, designers. Amazing. I mean, some of these guys from an idea and a 1-minute pitch on Friday had products by Sunday, and some of them had revenues. It was like, amazing.
I think Cam blew my mind when he got a post into the Washington Post on Monday morning for a startup weekend idea from Perth that had happened on Friday evening, and it's just
really
what? Yeah, that was
Cam Sinclair, or which Cam?
Yeah, Cam Sinclair. Yeah.
Wow. So I was then in 2013. I went over to Business News and led its sort of digital transformation. And they didn't have a tech writer, and I thought no one's covering this startup scene. And I said to Mark Pownell, Mark Bayer, you know, I've come from it. I'm not a journalist, but I'll happily write. You know, there's this Founder Institute and there's the startup weekends, and we would even send our video down, and video guy go down, and she'd take videos and do a little package and interview the winner and put it up on our YouTube site. And it was all very interesting. And they actually persisted with it. And I think I wrote over 200 articles on startups. And I think you can called Startup of the Week.
I think you can classify yourself as a journaless now. No. I think 200 articles is...
Or an amazing typist.
And they weren't very long. Because they didn't have a tech writer, I think they were genuinely quite happy that I was doing it. When I became CEO, that all got a bit hard to do that as well. So we brought on Marcus. I had a bit of an evil plan. I actually wanted to bring startup news into Business News, really, and mainly to get my hands on Marcus, because I wanted his tech talent. And I didn't want to be writing all the tech articles myself. And that's what I thought, well, he could come in and we could do all this tech stuff, and maybe we could take over startup news as well and incorporate it in Business News and sell ads on it, or I don't know what I was thinking, and get a bit of extra tech talent with our IT guys. We only had one IT guy. That didn't quite work out. But I suppose my evil plan eventually prevailed after I left Business News, come to think of it. So I was really impressed with what startup news could do on its own, because I knew how hard that was. Taking over Business News was much easier. It was 25 years in going. They had a sales team, a subs team, a good brand, and the corporates read it. And I thought, if I could write about startups in Business News, this is where the angel investors are, the high net worth individuals. If I could educate them about startups, that was my hidden agenda going into Business News, I suppose, as well as helping Business News transform to be more of a digital business. I was delighted that Marcus was writing for them. And now I think Chloe writes for them as well. So they've sort of kept that going.
Yeah. And
I left Business News now 3 years ago, coming up to 3 years ago, since we had that pint in Fib McGee's.
Sounds like a pivotal moment.
Good time flies.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed writing for Business News. It was really, and it gave me so much credibility. It was like writing for a real, as opposed to just being a blogger. But I found that in the whole newspaper thing, as soon as you actually print something and actually put it in print, then the respect and the credibility goes up a notch.
Legitimacy. It's like,
yeah, exactly.
You're instantly legitimate.
For some reason,
platform.
Just putting things on paper suddenly makes you, as you say, legitimate.
Well, the West didn't really do much, did they? I mean, Nick Sass did something for a while, then he left. And then it's sort of, every now and again, they do a little couple of articles in startups and think, oh yeah, we've done that. But no one really focuses on this emerging startup scene.
I think the difficulty there is that the founders are gone, and the owner is not in Western Australia. So the West is just a business running without a captain. Now, I don't know if we'll cut this bit.
Yeah. But I think the other huge difference is that Startup News and Business News we're writing from inside the scene.
Yes.
Yeah.
Rather than being journalists coming outside. Like Nick Sass did a great job, but it was always this external point of view. And he didn't, he obviously never read Lean Startup. He didn't actually really understand why this was so different from normal businesses and the whole kind of structure of how this will work. And so his writing always reflected that. And it was really...
Can I jump right in on that and just ask you to kind of describe what you see Lean Startup as? Because there's a lot of interpretations of Lean Startup, and it's really interesting, especially from a tech perspective versus, say, an engineering perspective or a standard, let's say, like manufacturing business.
It all started with the cloud. Basically, as soon as we had cloud computers that could scale infinitely according to demand, then it becomes possible to do large-scale experimental websites that will just scale. Will just happen. And so you can, if you throw something cheaply together and then put it right in front of the audience, you get immediate audience feedback, and that will scale with the size of your audience. Because the internet is also, like everybody is on the internet, your entire market is sitting out there, and you can reach that entire market instantly. I mean, this is the Startup Weekend thing. You can have an idea on Friday, you hack together some product. On Saturday evening, it's out there on the internet. And then, so by Sunday, hopefully, we've got 4,000 customers for a product that was just an idea on Friday. And it's that speed. That's the essence of all the Lean Startup stuff is don't build it and then assume your audience will come. Instead, hack something together, chuck it out there, see what the audience likes, iterate rapidly until you've actually discovered what your audience really like. Then you can turn that into a product. Having spent the last 2 years doing exactly not that, I now feel really hypocritical talking about this. Because my co-founder, I've basically been sitting on a salary building a product for the last 2 years, and my co-founder's been happily paying me and dreading the point we'll put it on the internet. And I've been constantly arguing, like, we should get it out on the internet, we should put it out, we should launch it.
There's that really great quote, which is, if you're not embarrassed of your product at launch, you launch too late.
Yeah.
You should be embarrassed. It should be as knocked up as possible.
Yeah, it was Reid Hoffman, the founder of LinkedIn, who actually said that. And he's got this excellent article on LinkedIn, which is where he explains about all this, because there's a few interpretations of that.
Of course.
And I was having to explain my co-founder this. Like, yes, I'm completely embarrassed by it. We should totally launch it. No, I'm too embarrassed by it. So that's basically what the whole startup revolution came because of this infinitely scalable, infinite market thing, which completely alters the dynamics of how you build businesses and account for them. And the financial models for software as a service businesses are weird because basically the only cost is marketing. Everything else just fades into nothing because your audience is infinite and your potential reach is infinite, but you have to pay for it. So it's literally how much money can you make from each customer? How much money do you have to pay to get each customer? Those are the only two numbers that matter. If one's bigger than the other, you've got a business.
And marketing is a really interesting space now, because the way I see the internet is more like a cyclone tornado just shouting at people. And actually getting your message into that tornado is the question.
Impossible.
Yeah. And everyone just thinks, you just throw an advert up on Facebook, but that's how you get trolls writing mean messages to you, not how you get customers.
No, it's fascinating. I mean, actually launching a product on the internet. So you put something on the internet and you immediately think, millions of people are going to get
job done.
It.
Yeah.
Nobody does. Nothing. Nada. You'll get a hit every 5 seconds from somebody trying default WordPress credentials to try and get into your site. But apart from that, nothing. It's just
going live with Startup News was pretty much Twitter back in the day when Twitter was useful. But it was pretty much just I just started following everyone in the startup scene and everyone who was following that person. and then just 10 a day, and pretty much the numbers grew from that, which was an interesting one back then. And you could do it, you could just start by that way. I'm not sure how useful that is anymore, but in Perth, we kind of estimated there was about 2,000 people in total that sort of make up the startup community, actively. And so, you could, in a sense, reach out to all those, and most of those guys are on Twitter. And so you could get them at least to see that you'd followed them, and they'll go, what's that thing, or ignore you. But that was a pretty quick ramp up to get the traffic. And then getting beyond that, and Charlie would know this, getting beyond that is a really long struggle, because it is a fairly small startup community. But, if we've got a fair chunk of it, I think that's a really good thing. One of my key goals, as well as getting the startups out there and getting some media, was I always used to read about the Homebrew Computer Club in Silicon Valley, and read about these guys that used to turn up to this. And then 20 years later, you're reading about this, some guy bought this circuit board along, and, he happened to be Bill Gates or something. And they were just showing their stuff in the club, and I always wanted Startup News to be that Homebrew Computer Club publication that people will look back on and say, oh, look who was in here, and, see what this person did or didn't do. And I think it's been a good little history and a little logbook, I guess, of what's gone on in Perth, at least in the last 6-7 years. And hopefully we can carry it on and make something, sustainable out of it.
I think there actually is a good community, and there's also, I think there's a big percentage of people who would be part of the community if they knew about it. And that's, after going to kind of incubators in Sydney and Melbourne, I would say our community in some ways is stronger than theirs, because it's a bit more focused on DIY rather than trying to find a random CTO to actually build it for them.
Maybe it's a bit more cohesive. It's more because it's smaller.
Yes,
it's more cohesive and more as a gel together.
Yeah.
Hats off to what Patrick and the other guys did, because when I took it over, 1,000 unique visitors a week, whatever it is, and 1,000 people subscribing to the weekly email, which I used to read at Business News, absolutely religiously, to see what was going on. And I'm still bumping into people. My day job is now working for the federal government, trying to hand out money to innovators and startup guys. And I'm meeting them and coming across them all over the place. And I'm saying, you've really got to look at Startup News. Not because I'm involved in it, but just look, there's 1,250 stories on there. Pretty much anyone you can imagine, just type in, you'll read stories about them. Way of connecting, way of collaborating, maybe asking for advice, reaching out, finding your CTO, whatever. And now with the events calendar and also the work that Andrew Outhwaite has done, he's basically lodged every single element of the startup ecosystem. He calls it a hub, and he very graciously gave it to us to host. So it's all his work.
Cool.
He worked for 2 years and visited pretty much every accelerator, incubator, amazing. Whatever. And then we decided we were going to use Airtable, which I think, Patrick, we're now not going to use, but because it's quite expensive, but it's just a way of getting it up there.
Yeah.
So you can go to Startup News and go on ecosystem, and you can see all the founder groups and incubators and accelerators and angel groups and all that. And that's an obvious place to have it.
So that really leads into one of the questions here that actually a few people asked us to ask, which is, and this is a bit of a generic question, but what do you think constitutes a good incubator? And then the follow-up to that question is, are there any in Perth? Which you don't have to answer if you don't want to.
I got to be careful what I say.
This question may be loaded. Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, so statistically speaking, incubators do not help startups.
Interesting.
The background failure rate is exactly the same whether you've been to an incubator or not. However, for connecting you in the community, like that startup might not work because you went to an incubator, but the connections and the knowledge and everything else, it's really good for. So, a good incubator, is really one doesn't. I mean, don't worry too much about what terms they're offering. I mean, don't sign your first child over, but really, like you're still probably going to fail, even going through an incubator, and it's much more about how connected is that incubator to the community, who are you going to meet there, what kind of mentors are you going to get, what kind of advice are you going to get, what was the people going through it before you, what was their experience, that kind of thing. Don't, my advice to all first timers is you're probably going to fail. Don't burn relationships in order to get your startup together, because you're going to need the relationships are actually way more important than the startup, because the startup will probably fail, and those relationships you're really going to need that going forward. So
yeah, absolutely. So what you're saying is networking is actually the most important part of an incubator, not actually the financial stake they take or.
So, but again, the statistics don't really help, because we never hear of. There's quite a lot of
survivorship bias.
Bias, exactly. So, you get people like Sector, for instance, one of the huge WA success stories, which didn't really get involved in the community right the way through until they were pretty much successful. Involvement in the community is no guarantee of success. It does make the journey easier, though. We don't know how many people didn't connect with the community and then failed. We do know there are quite a few people who didn't connect with the community and then succeeded, but there are also quite a few who are definitely part of the community and have succeeded. So it's a kind of...
Yeah. And everyone tries to claim success over the successes. So
yes,
I've heard so many reasons why Canva succeeded. Okay. Not everyone that touched them is necessarily a reason why they're successful and worth $4 billion. But in Perth, all I'd say is, and obviously this is my personal opinion, not that of the Department of Industry I work for, a quick disclaimer. There has been a broad, lack of funding for early stage startups when you compare the amount of money that goes to everywhere else. So if you read your startup news, we cover this quite a bit. And one thing I do is I go and look at on business news. They're very good at looking at all the corporate deals and all the money that's invested in WA companies. And I think last year there was over $6.5 billion was invested in WA companies. That's not M&A, that's investment in, that's funding of, okay? And that's WA companies, $6.5 billion. What proportion of that equivalent went to early stage tech? If you've been reading your startup news, ladies and gentlemen, you'd know the answer.
I would know the answer, yeah.
God, I would say less than 1%.
Yeah, I would say 0%, to be honest.
0.6%.
0.6%.
A bit sad, isn't it?
Yeah.
These early stage tech scalable potential businesses, when we're talking about not all your portfolio, but just a little bit of it, that little bit over here, you can have your ASX and your commercial property and your yachts and your house in Dunsborough and everything else, but just a little bit, now it's getting better. $41 million was invested in early stage tech, according to Tech Board, and it was 26 million, I think, the year before. So it's lumpy, it's up and down a bit.
Yep.
But that's a proportion of the total investment. It's pretty pathetic.
Ultimately, though, it's not a property, so Australian investors are not interested.
You can't.
Yeah, but it could be the next Canva, couldn't it? It might not be. Probably not
absolutely.
Be, but it could be.
Yeah.
But I think
they've done in 7-8 years.
I'm just making fun of Australian investors.
This has always been presented as a problem for the Perth community, but I'm never going to Sydney. So I ran a fintech startup weekend in Sydney, and the attitude there is totally different because there's so much money. They don't care about customers. Trying to tell these people, right, you have to have customers by Sunday. They looked at me like I was a raving lunatic. Like, nobody really got this because they were all focused on the investor pitch. As far as they
just raise lots of money. Yeah. That's the success, right?
Exactly.
Raising money is a success.
And the investors are in such a race. They're not even asking them to test their market.
Exactly. Because you can't get investment in Perth, you have to go to the customer, and I think that's incredibly good discipline. In fact, because you can always raise money elsewhere once you've got a customer base, and forcing Perth startups to actually go and get a customer base first is actually really good.
I agree with that 100%. And some startups should not be raising money at all, and some do not deserve to be invested in. And I'm not arrogant enough to know which one should and which one shouldn't. If I did, I'd be sitting on a desert island next to Richard Branson, kite surfing with Bill Ty. And I'm not, obviously. I'm sitting here talking to you. But yeah, so there's courses, but there should be more than 0.6%. I mean, come on.
Yeah, I agree.
Some rocket ships need to be built before you blast off.
And if you get in early...
And they might have got early validation.
Yeah.
To the low degree. I mean, I can tell you stories that are just strangely ridiculous. One company I got all the way through accelerating commercialization. They ended up getting a grant at the most competitive grant meeting ever. 29 projects were on the table, and they didn't have enough money for anything like 29 projects. And it was just before the election was going to be called, so everyone was rushing in. It was about this time last year, right? Now, these guys got a grant, and I was pretty sure this was one of the best things I've ever seen. But they were ready 8 months earlier to go to committee. Why couldn't they go? They couldn't get their matching funds. They went to 129, I'm not making this up, 129 different people and organizations over 8 months. And they got 129 no's in a row. Now, I don't know about you, but I think after the 25th no, I'd have cried in the shower, hugging my knees. I don't know many entrepreneurs would go and get 129 no's in a row over 8 months. And I kept in contact with them. Everything else was ready to go. And they were so adamant and so focused that they were going to raise this money to run these trials and get the matching funds. Do you know where they got their money from in the end? Singaporean VC. So no one in Australia backed an ag tech business, one of the best things I've seen. They went and pitched at Perth Angels, Innovation Bay. I took them to a load of people who'd made money in ag. I mean, for goodness sake, what are we doing? These guys are out of Surrey. They're really smart. They're PhDs. They've been doing this for 25 years. Very good technology. And we're not going to back that.
Yeah.
I mean, the market's failing, isn't it? The market's not working. If that's
absolutely.
I think... I made the joke earlier that it's not a property, but it's not a property. So
scalable technology, it's even better. How's property done recently? How's the ASX done recently?
And how are SaaS companies doing right now? Very well. Absolutely. I think the Australian investor market is uneducated and really risk adverse, but not in a way that makes sense. Just in a I don't understand this, so I'd prefer not to. I
totally get that. If you don't, I would not be a good mining investor, even if I had the money, because I don't understand anything about that industry. I totally understand how somebody who's made their money in mining can then not be comfortable investing in technology because they can't see it, they can't pick it up. They can't
not even 1% of their
1%.
What if it's mining tech?
1%.
But this is a failure, I don't think, of the actual investors. I think it's the whole financial industry and the experience with reverse takeovers and all of that. There should be a diversification part of portfolios here. There should be the finance industry in Perth should be saying to these people, look, I know you don't understand it, but we do. So we'll take 2% of your portfolio and we'll chuck it into some tech stuff. It may not work. But it's only 2%, and it's
that is actually a very good business idea. Right there.
But there's nobody. We tried. No, I tried talking. So myself and Mal Gordon, we tried setting up during the whole reverse takeover thing. We tried going and talking to some of these people, and it was just a complete farce. I'm not going to pull punches here. They're total fucking crooks. They should not be. The entire lot of them. I didn't find a single person who was actually interested in their client's welfare or making money for their client or doing anything. It was all about what's in it for me, how I can make it. It was just, God, I felt like having a shower after every single time I met with any of these people. I had to disinfect my hand where it touched them.
That comes in handy.
I was going to say, we've done this whole talk so far without mentioning the C word and the COVID word, as in, not the words that Marcus normally speaks.
On my list of questions, obviously, we'll get to it now.
But I want to just finish my rant on that. I mean,
I definitely want you to.
Someone has got the ability to go to 129 pitches and get 129 no's. That's the entrepreneur I want to back, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
But we're going to miss a lot if that's the experience you're going to get, and if this is one of the better things that we've seen in Perth. So I think there is an education of the investor. I think getting back to your original question about incubators, most entrepreneurs now, there's such a good ecosystem, can go and get educated, go and collaborate, go and meet, go and learn. There's a lot of education of entrepreneurs, Lean Canvas, whatever it is.
Yeah.
But there isn't a lot of education of investors in this area. And I think that's where markets are failing. And I'm not quite sure how to do it.
It's a
and
hard,
I don't think
hard
the West
market to
Perth
educate.
stockbrokers are going to do it. I think it needs to be somebody else. Maybe it's state government or whatever. But I think you don't ask for money off government necessarily, because there's lots of money here. There's $6.5 billion being invested in companies in WA every year. It's just educating a little bit of that market to give more than 0.6 of it to the early stage tech scene. Maybe if you just gave 1% or 1.5%.
Mining startups have very little difficulty finding money.
Yeah.
And their success rate is no better than technology
90%
startups.
of mines make no money.
Yeah. But they have very little difficulty. They essentially speed date investors and find money, find capital very quickly. Technology, on the other hand,
there's a market for it. And probably if you want to raise money for a mine, Perth's about the best place after Vancouver that you're going to do that in. So we're set up for that. We've got lawyers, accounting, and there is a market, literally an ASX, where you can price iron ore and price all these different mining materials. So people understand that. We as a state have grown up on that. But it only happened in 1959 when Richard Court and a few other people changed some laws, because it used to be illegal to export iron ore. And then this got changed. That was a federal government move. And then WA government with some WA miners through the 60s. So they built it up. And I feel like we're sort of doing that with tech. Yes. It's going to take a while. People like me are far too impatient.
Yeah, I'm right there with you.
Look back on 2012 onwards and go, well, that's where it started.
Yeah.
No surprise that Startup News then started in 2013, and then everything else that's happened since, right?
Yeah. Well, let's get to the boring question. I'm going to preface it with, I hope you're doing well in these troubling times, challenging times, which has been the start of every single friggin' email I've received in the last month. So how has COVID-19 affected the startup community and startups in WA?
And in Berlin, I'd love to hear as well.
Yeah, and in Berlin.
What's it like over there?
Interesting too, yeah. But Patrick, I'll field this question to you.
Okay. Well, I was going to say, since we went through this nearly the whole thing without even mentioning why we're all on a video, why we're, at home and all these things, I think this has been the thing with startups is they're like, business as usual. I've just felt it's like, oh, great, I can just stay home now. I'm not even expected to go somewhere,
Activity hasn't changed at all, really.
Yeah.
No, it's actually increased from our perspective.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I think it's kind of been a good thing. And also, startups are, we work at home, we work through the night, we reach out to markets through digital means. I think it's been a good thing for a lot of us. The business I run, we've seen a bit of a mix. So I think some startups have struggled, especially ones that are around social enterprise, not social enterprise, social
physical
activities. Yeah, physical activities. So all those sorts of things are struggling. I mean, I play in a band, Charlie plays in a band, all those things are just sort of been knocked on the head. Yet some other startups have slightly pivoted to adapt to it. So, we're seeing things like Space Deco, where they're very physical based, have to move to having some different kind of real estate to look after, and a whole bunch of other startups have had to just slightly pivot what they're doing, but they already were reaching out to the right audience, and that audience itself has had to adapt. So therefore, they're reaching out for people who can adapt with them. And so we've seen a bunch of startups want to do some different things, and I think there's a lot of people at home now that just are just more active. There's just way more activity. I haven't seen a downturn as such in the startup space. I think I've seen a lot more people with more space and room to think, and the real world hasn't gotten in their way. They can focus on what they want to build, the e-commerce and a whole range of video, of course, like this. But there's been a bunch of things that people have been doing. So I think it's been largely good. And I think on the other side of things, what happens to retail and physical stores and things will be a lot different. And it's probably a reset that a lot of retail needed to have. I don't know, but yeah, for us, startups have been still going strong. Some have had to slow down, but some have accelerated. So,
what about
across the portfolio that we've invested in over the last 2, 3, 4 years? So, what we were told to do by the department was immediately drop everything and get in touch with everybody that we've invested in. So, over 420 companies have had about 220 million over the last 5 years in this program. And so I was immediately on the phone and Zoom calling with those companies in WA, and there was a variety, right? So a third to a half of either minimal, as Patrick was saying, minimal impact, or just a little bit of impact, but they can get through it. They're typically taking 20% pay cuts or working 4 days a week, or some staff being stood down temporarily or whatever, being furloughed, and then maybe now JobKeeper's up and Cash Boost is up. People are starting to see some money coming in from the federal stimulus, so that shores things up a bit. A minority, I'd say about 15 to 25%, have been actively advantaged by COVID, and are just gangbusters like never before. But there's also a quarter that have just everything stopped. I mean, I had one company that we invested in a year ago. They'd grown to about $350,000 a month revenue. That has gone down to $10,000.
Wow.
So because it's about installing products into houses, and their salespeople cannot go into houses. So it's completely stopped. Another one that was getting their PCBs in from China, could not get any PCBs in from China, could not do their project, could not get out into the farms, another ag tech idea, because the farms have also got no supplies, and because people can't move around, no staff. So they have been right royally smashed, and I'm very worried about some of them. And we're looking at what we can do to assist them through the normal sort of government ways. I mean, one of the good things they've got, I suppose, as I've told them, is, well, you're on a government program and you've had hundreds of thousands of dollars. So about the last thing the government wants is you to fall over. So that's an advantage, I suppose, of being on the program.
Almost, you can't repay those favors without actually succeeding through this.
How's it in Berlin?
Yeah.
So in Berlin, they just relaxed the whole you can't meet anybody, you can't do anything. The bars and restaurants are still closed, which means all the meetup spaces are still closed. They're just allowing, I think it's meetings up to 10 people.
Yeah, same.
So
it's the same here, actually. Funnily enough.
Yeah.
So relaxed yesterday, wasn't it?
Yeah.
The WA rules.
Yeah, for us it was last week. But I mean, it's basically all the entire startup community here, like the tech community and everything, has just gone into hibernation. And all the people, I mean, my girlfriend works for a tech startup fintech startup in Berlin, and they're all working from home. So, she's on Slack and Zoom every day, but working from home. It's the actual startup scene, the businesses are all going fine, and the startup's still working, as Patrick said. But all the community side of the stuff has had to stop because you just can't do like 100-person meetup over Zoom. It doesn't really work. None of the tech meetups that have been going, they're all just like, wait until we can do this again, and then we'll do it.
A few meetups that have been running, like virtual meetups. I think I went to one in Seattle where it was just basically a live webinar. Yeah.
I don't think it works. It's actually funny. As soon as all this happened, I experienced a Zoom meeting with my partner's family, like a social Zoom meeting. And it was horrible because only one person can talk. And that is not how you socialize with people. You know, you sit at a table and there's like 10 conversations going on between 15 people, and you just kind of like zone in and out of different conversations. You know, it's very dynamic. We've actually started building some tech to create these kind of dynamic positional audio style meetings, because there's nothing like it out there, and I'm fairly sick of Zoom meetings where one person gets to talk, which currently is me. So, and I think the community, it's weird though. This tech could have existed 10 years ago, but doesn't, because we never needed it. And what my fears is that we'll release it and everything will be back to normal.
But I think I get the feeling that back to normal is going to change.
Oh yeah,
the world's changed.
Oh yeah,
good. I think, and I think a lot of people have discovered that they can work remotely.
I think that's going to be the big one. Anything that helps people work remotely is going to be, the next 5 years is going to be a lot bigger than it used to be. So
yeah, and it's like they've proven that they could, you know.
Yeah, precisely.
As opposed to,
and buying and selling remotely.
It was always down to bad management anyway. And unless a manager can actually wander around and see that you're busy at your desk, then
but now they get no choice.
working.
So now the experience has been proven that the people are still working.
And this is effectively a training period for how to manage people while they're working from home. So now we're going to have a whole bunch more managers.
Which startups have been doing for 10 years anyway, haven't they?
Yeah.
Oh,
it's just because they work all day, all night.
That's it.
I think
that's only the founders though. Everyone else doesn't. But it just requires trust, which actually is probably what most managers are lacking in.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, I did an MBA in Perth, and yes, it was this whole like working remotely, and what you measure is not how many hours your people are sitting at their desk, but actually what they do was quite a foreign concept to a lot of the other people on the MBA. God, I was going to say that. No, it's gone.
Yeah, but
I was going to say on the remote working, I've got a team in Nepal, about 40 guys. And for years they've been saying, oh, it'd be good if we could work from home. And I tell you what, there's at least half now that are just dying to get back to the office.
I miss the office.
Yeah, there's
legitimately
there is the social, the catch ups, the coffee walks, being able to chat to someone. But it is interesting, that I'm the same. I wouldn't like 100% remote working, and I don't like 100% in office.
Like 3 days.
The options. The options. One of the things that we set up for our teams was like this Zoom. We use a thing called Jitsi, but each team, so we've got a bunch of clients, and if there's 1, 2, 3, 4 devs working there, they just set up a Jitsi room and they just log into there in the morning. They just mute their audio and camera, and then they're just in the room. So if someone says, "Oh, hey," you can you're always there. So it kind of gives that sense of there's someone there still, and that's been really good. We've really enjoyed doing that. Without that, you got to initiate a call or book something or do a chat or something.
Yeah, that's how we're doing it at Ninja. We're everyone's in a room all day basically. They're all on mute, but they can talk at any time.
That's it. I think it's been really good.
Rooms to jump into as well. So we try to emulate what we had back at the office.
I miss not being able to do the general's walk, just like and say, "Oh, show me what that is." That's a definite disadvantage, and I miss being involved in everyone's day.
But at the same time, for some reason,
it's not micromanaging, Alex.
Yes.
No, it's not micromanaging. It's literally just. Otherwise, I'm disconnected.
Stop doing the general's walk, Alex.
I love it. I love it. Stand behind someone. Show me that.
It's not about you. It's about them.
You can still do that. Like with Jitsi, we just say, "Oh, what are you working on?" They just hit share screen, and you go, "Oh, okay, that looks pretty good," and carry on.
Trust.
I trust them. I'm just like I'm curious, and every time they show me something, I'm like, "This is amazing."
It's Charlie. So there you go.
One of the best managers I've ever had, headmaster at Hale School, John Nguyen, the ex-Australian Test cricketer. When I first came to Perth, I was a school teacher before I did my crazy .com. And I was doing my MBA as well at the same time. And I was on a leadership unit, and you had to interview a leader. So, no better than him, You go down to the WACA. There's the John Nguyen stand. He won 3 Sheffield Shields with the WA team in the 70s. And he had people like Lillian Thompson and Rod Marsh, big egos, far better players than him in his team. And yet they all worshipped him. And they used to turn up to school still when I was teaching there, and hey, Imbus, how's it going, and all that. And he was the most humble person, brilliant leader, and you could see him strategically moving people around almost like boards on a chessboard or players on a cricket field when he moved somebody into this position or that position, in the school. And I challenged him and I said, I notice you're around a lot. You walk around the school a lot. Why do you do that? And he said, you know what, if I'm up in my headmaster's office for more than about half an hour, I put my pen down, shut my laptop, and I just walk somewhere. I'll walk to the English lab, the French lab, the English department. I'll walk down to the PE. I'll just wander around with no agenda at all.
Yeah.
I'll just put my head in. How's it going? And and he does that so often. People are used to him doing it. So and he would learn so much more in a nicer environment. What's going on? Pick up any vibe. Pick up any issues. And because he did it so much, people were used to interacting with him.
Yeah.
And were very open about it as well. He was a very approachable, nice guy. So keep doing it. I'm only I'm only jiving with you, Alex. Keep doing it. But it's the way in which you do it,
of course,
and the manner in which you do it, the purpose for it.
You're not doing it.
You're not just checking up on.
No, you're not doing it to catch. You're not doing it to catch someone out. You're doing it to actually be involved in their day. And I think it's a lot harder remotely. It really is, because it's more transactional. Which
I actually love working remotely. I mean, for 30 years, I was having to commute and run departments and run companies and, sitting in boring meetings where you're sitting there going, why are we all in this meeting? You prefer to stick forks in your eyes. Why are we in this meeting? And it's meeting after meeting after meeting. And then you're checking emails. You go home and go, what did I actually get done? I just did meetings and checking emails. And then day after day. And then commuting on either side of it. Strip that away. Wow, so much more productive you can be. And I actually love it. I've been remote working now best part of 3 years. I just walk down the road to the local cafe, not at the moment, but meet startups there or go in the startup events or meet them at their offices. I'm a bit bored that I can't do that. Everything's on Zoom. But in terms of destroying of time, God, the things I used to do destroyed time.
Yeah, that's very true.
I've actually, the boring question about COVID, it hasn't made really any impact on me at all. It might have impacted some of the companies I work with, but in terms of me, hardly any impact at all.
Maybe less takeaway coffees and stuff though.
That leads to my next question, and we've actually kind of already answered this, but I want to direct this one at you, Marcus. The simple question is, do you think everyone can learn how to build their own MVP? And that's people who can't even code yet. And do you think that COVID-19 will inspire the next generation of, startup founders learning to code Python at home, smashing out their own MVP?
Okay, so there's two parts to this. So one is an MVP isn't what everyone thinks an MVP is, and the second part is can everyone learn to code? So
yes. It was definitely a Trojan's horse of a question, so I'm glad you noticed that.
Okay, so to learn to code part, yes, everyone can learn to code. That doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be awesome at it, or that you're going to be able to build an entire product, or that you've got the aptitude for it. Some people do, some people don't, but it's definitely something that everyone can do. And my take on, if you're going to do a SaaS startup that depends on technology, one person in your team at least must be able to build the product. You can't do this by outsourcing the entire thing, because it's a core competence of your entire business. If you haven't got somebody in your team who can code, then you shouldn't really be doing this, or you go and find someone. The second part of it, the MVP. So the point of an MVP is to prove that somebody will pay to have that problem solved. It's not a tech demo. So an MVP is really, if you can do it with a spreadsheet, the Lean Startup book itself has lots of examples of people who've done their MVP by literally manually going up and doing the classic one of the shopping startup that was going to try and give people a recipe and all the ingredients for that. And their MVP was literally they waited at a supermarket until they found a suitable person in their target market, went up and talked to them, agreed that here's a recipe, we'll go and buy the stuff. came back, delivered the stuff to them, watched them make it. There wasn't a single line of code inside. And that's really, there's so many people who are like, oh, but I've got to have an app. And it, there's a lot of people who actually want an app. They don't really want a business or a startup or anything. They don't want customers. They just want an app.
There's a lot of tech entrepreneurs who build the continuous deployment system well before they build the app.
Absolutely. And I'm as guilty of that as anybody else. It was one of my huge kind of achievements with Startup News is I didn't rewrite WordPress because there were so many problems with it. And Patrick and I actually, we got approached by a development house in Perth to say, hey, this is shit. It's really slow. You do much better with a custom built engine. And we kind of went, no. We're not going to do that. We're going to stick with WordPress. The temptation to rewrite WordPress was huge.
That never goes away. I think that's just, if you're in software development at some point in your life, you're going, fuck, I hate WordPress.
Everything has a purpose. I'm pretty not against anything if it gets to a point quickly and it validates the thing. If something warrants it, and I'm CTO of a startup myself in Creddy, and the amount of times devs or people have said we should rewrite this because it's ugly or horrible or technical debt, blah blah blah. I'm like, okay, we'll do that. We don't need customers, so let's do that. It's much more fun. It's always that trade-off as the tech is meant to be there to support a business and a business model. And that's what you should start with. And like Marcus said, MVPing is about proving a model, and then building just enough tech to support that model and then incrementally getting better and bigger at it. So it is whatever tech does the job at the time without sending you broke is the best one to choose.
And
but that whole, turning up to a startup meetup and there's some, ideas guy there who's like, hey, will you build my thing? And trying to persuade them that they don't actually need anybody to write their code, that they can go and improve their business model manually first. And once they've got some customers, then they're going to find it a lot easier to come back to a startup meetup and say, hey, I've already got customers. I just need somebody to start help automating this. A whole different ballgame, whole different sell. But trying to get that through to as you say, educate the market on that it's impossible. And
that's why I like taking over. Sorry to interrupt. Startup News, because they've done all the tech work and they already had 1,000 people subscribing to it a week, and they already had been around for 4 years when I got involved. And I always looked at them. I thought, well, I can't see how you're going to have a paywall. Startups aren't going to pay to receive Startup News. So you can't, whereas business news could, right? We had a corporate audience and we proved, and they had been proving for 20 years that people would subscribe to the paper. And I just tweaked it and made it a subscription to digital. And one of my proudest moments in my career, actually, in any job, is when I left business news and subscription income was the biggest income of the business, because that to me meant that they could continue. And it would align everything beautifully for them. I couldn't see Startup News having a paywall. I also found advertising really hard. How are you going to try and get advertisers? And I'm sure you had a good hot go at this, guys. Yeah. How would you get advertisers, and how would you sell advertising? The eyeballs aren't big enough, and who's going to advertise to startups anyway and pay for that? And then memberships. You can have membership. Startup WA tried that, and how's that going to work? And we tried all these things, right?
Consulting.
To me, it was.
Memberships would have worked, we think, maybe. We famously, Patrick and I presented the E-Group. Like, hey, this is the history.
I remember watching that. Yeah.
And we had people wandering up at the end of the meeting going, I would totally pay $100 a year to be a member of Startup News.
Sure.
When we actually launched it, and we just said, I think our MVP was a Patreon link and a PIN payments link, so you could just pay for it. And we did get people, like I think we had 3 or 4 people who paid maybe $5.
Not enough to get it to the next level.
So my brainwave, such as it was if I could get sponsors involved, right, paying so many thousands per year to basically support the startup community by giving money to Startup News, I could take that money and I could use it with media journo students at uni so they could do the writing and then they could get some exposure in publishing. So that was my brainwave, such as it was. And so I ran around and being taught like a good startup to do, get the revenue first before you build it, right? Well, the guys already built it, but get the revenue on. And I ran around, signed up 2 or 3 sponsors, and I went, well, that's paid for the first year. So then it was just a matter of going and contacting, and because Curtin were one of my first sponsors, Curtin Uni media students, who were delighted to be paid to write on what effectively is a blog, Startup News, about startups. And now I've got 12 writers. 3 have carried on from last year, 9 signed up this year, 5 sponsors, and it now works beautifully. So just building off what the guys have done, just adding that business model in has meant I don't have to write everything, but I can be like the editor, if you like, and I can see them come in. We have a Slack channel and we chat on it. And then I have a Dropbox where I put all the media releases, and then they pick them up, file them, and then I publish them, and Bob's your uncle. Then wonderful Patrick, when I stuff things up or technically things don't work, Patrick goes and fixes it like he had to this weekend. Thanks, Patrick. So that sort of works, but it's building off what the guys have done earlier and just adding a business.
No, I think that the huge difference there is building off your connections.
Yeah.
Because we tried getting sponsored, and it just wasn't like, people were like, hey, this is great, and all the rest of it. You've only got 200 readers per thing. And it was just, we didn't have the credibility. We didn't have the connections. We didn't have that. It was the humiliating swiftness in which he turned this whole thing around and made it profitable was entirely down to... it was like I've been fighting for 2 years to try and make some kind of money for all this. And then, you did it in 3 days. So, but that's I think down to your connections and your personality and your reputation within the community. Being the ex-CEO of Business News, walking into Startup News, taking it over, and then approaching yourself, like picking up the phone to your personal friends and be able to say, hey, Bob, I've got this now. Like, that is a different approach. Like me as a nobody from the startup scene trying to get a major corporate sponsor, it's just never going to work. Whereas the ex-CEO of Business News now pitching this, that's a different ballgame. That's a whole different. And that's, why I keep coming back to community and networking and stuff. It's always about who you know. And
not only the ex-CEO of Business News, but a successful startup builder, which is crazy because a lot of the I call them startup vultures, have zero startup experience. Which I think it's a community full of people trying to sell things to startups, which makes me kind of feel a bit sick in my stomach. Yeah.
But to be honest, I was in that position. The business model for Startup News when I was doing it solo was I was doing freelancing, developing people's MVPs and writing code for people and doing that. And that was supported by Startup News because everybody said to anybody coming into the scene, hey, you should go and talk to Marcus, he knows everybody. And so I got kind of first pick of all these people coming into the startup scene with money who were looking for coders.
That's what it was about.
That's how I justify. I must have spent 2 hours.
We were selling this for the last hour as this great thing for the community and get out there. It was just getting gigs for Marcus. No.
That's the business. I'd spend 2 hours a day or something writing startup news stories. So there's no way you could justify it in terms of that. But effectively, the thing that enabled me to carry on doing that was the freelance stuff. So it's kind of.
Patrick told me he used to run out in his lunch break and interview startups and then go back and write it all up in his lunch break.
That was my day. I've got hours and hours. I'd record them over a coffee. Telling their story about how they founded, and then at nighttime I would transpose them, try and turn it into a story. I've got no writing experience, and so just trying to put that into a story and get as many of those queued up as I could. But I would find that I would just end up talking for like an hour and a half, sorry, corporate bosses, about what they were doing because I was so interested in just hearing the problems they were trying to solve. And every domain that they were working in, I just found, really interesting. There were obviously some that I would try and sort of steer away, like, no one needs another coffee app, but there was always some really good ones in there as well. So I got a lot out of that. And it just took a lot of time. We did get some journo students who were paying to do some stories in the first year, and that was really good. One of those has gone on to the US, New York acting school, and now is a presenter on TV in the US. So we've seen some good people come through as well. And, you know, we interviewed Adair Ressi from the US as well, got a nice video interview there. And we were just having a ball in sort of being pretend media moguls, but it was just fun. And, you know, just being around the startup scene and the energy of the people that you talk to kind of helps you as well. And so it was really good. But I tell you what, it does burn you out literally after a year of it. And then, you know, we cycled through a few folks and even Charlie, I think like the end of last year, you were like, whew, I'm glad I've got some people helping me out. But it does get to you. And I think you know, being able to get those sponsors to keep it going, because I think the longevity of it is going to be, you know, it's key sort of factor to make it.
Yeah, I think so.
Shout out to the sponsors.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah. This leads me to... Sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, it's all right. I was going to say, Charlie's done a bunch of good things, and he can spruik up the things he's done on Startup News later.
Well, I was going to say, this leads me to another question, which is, it's a two-part question. Do you think the government supports startups as much as they should in Perth? And of course, Charlie is excluded from answering this question. But I mean state government, so not national.
Careful, they're a sponsor of Startup News. Oh my God.
Well, all right, let me phrase it a different way.
Could we do more?
Yeah, if say tech startups were a stronger focus for the health of our economy, if technology was a stronger focus, do you think that would have a big effect on the technology startup? So technology is more of a focus in comparison to, say, mining or you know, traditional industry. Do you think that would make a big difference for Startup News and the startups that you cover?
Are you able to answer anything here, Charlie, or would you like? I think Marcus.
A couple of things I'd say. I'm not going to comment on that state government or federal government, because I work for a federal government program, which I think has provided over $200 million to various startups around the country.
We won't publish any of this without running it by you first. But I want to make that very clear.
I talk to a lot of my leads from accounting firms or law firms, and financial advisors. And as a general rule, I don't think the high net worths realize they can get a 20% tax deduction if they invest in a startup. And I don't think they know they can get a 10-year capital gains exemption on those shares.
Wow.
Did you know that?
I did not know that.
That was called in 2016. Now,
that's crazy.
That's a big move by the federal government. One of the, I think, best things Malcolm Turnbull did as Prime Minister. But I don't think it's well known.
No, I've never heard that before. It's amazing.
So early stage innovation company, it's called. If you invest in an ESIC, you get a 20% tax deduction. Even if you're a mom and pop investor, or sophisticated investors get a bit more, but you get a 20% tax deduction on that investment that year. So you put 100 grand in, you get 20 grand back, right, from the government. Wow. And then a 10-year capital gains exemption with no ceiling. I think the issue really is that people don't know about this.
Yeah. So I get the education that you're talking about, Charlie, that they're the practical kind of education points as well, you know, not just theoretical.
Yeah.
There's some real nuggets in there that you could use.
So I have other opinions about the whole government and stuff.
Yes.
There is.
I do not endorse these opinions.
There's about a 4-hour rant bottled up.
Oh, here we go. I've got a board meeting in about 18 minutes. But I do actually have a board meeting in 18 minutes.
Okay.
That was a fun question. So I kind of wanted just to float it out there. And
I'll just say I find it fascinating that, especially in Perth, like nowhere else in the world, but especially in Perth, everyone looks to the government to do something, as if the government is the bestower of all good things. The arts industry have just been utterly fucking decimated by withdrawal of government funding for their industry. If we actually want a sustainable startup industry, then the government needs to stay the hell out of it. In fact, the government staying the hell out of it is the best thing it could possibly do. As Charlie has just been talking about, if the government stops taxing people, that's really good. Just get the hell out. Like the government, like everybody comes into the startup scene saying, hey, what will the government do to support this? And it's just like, if you're relying on the government, you're doing it wrong.
Yeah.
You absolutely need to be focused on your customers. And if the government is going to support your startup, then it's going to fail, because sooner or later a politician is going to withdraw that funding and you're fucked.
Yeah.
So yeah,
we have applied for 0 grants.
cool.
Just because it seems a lot harder than actually just going to market.
Yep.
Not to
filling out forms.
not to say that the grants aren't worthwhile. We just
Charlie,
this is
sure,
our experience.
of course.
Yeah. But I did not know about those. What
And to be fair,
investors get.
accelerating commercialization for what I work is there for when the market has failed to back something novel and worthy. And we're there to try and rescue projects that are stuck at the MVP stage but not yet made commercial first sales.
Mm-hmm.
We're not there just to hand it out to everybody. Absolutely not. It's
You're not an
competitive.
incubator, exactly.
I met over 300 companies last year, 300 different companies. I only took 6 to Canberra for money, so 1 in 50. So it's not for everybody. It's 1 in 50 that I meet might meet the criteria and be at the right stage, and is basically a company we can help, and that deserves our help, right? And it's not for everybody. And just turning on more of that doesn't necessarily. I agree with the sentiment that Marcus says. Focus on the customer, get to MVP, get to revenues, iterate, rinse and repeat as much as possible. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's
The best idea that came out of the whole ideas boom discussion, because when Turnbull did the whole ideas boom thing, we went nuts in the whole community trying to work out what if we had to ask the government for anything, what would we ask for? And what we came back with is what we'd really like, and what would do the startup scene the most good is HEX for startups. It's basically a 2-year loan of, let's say, 25 grand a year, which you can just about live on, just about pay your rent, given free to anybody who asks for it, only it's a loan. It's exactly like HEX. And so you can basically, for 2 years, you don't have to worry about rent. You can go and focus on that. And that covers that, the valley of death, that first 2 years when you're pouring effort into building the business model, but you haven't got any customers and you don't have any revenue. And if after 2 years you still haven't got any revenue, it's not viable, then sorry, okay, it probably isn't going to work. You should probably stop doing it now. But if after 2 years it succeeded, then you've got enough money to pay back the government. Or if after 2 years you have to go into a job, then you can
pay back the government, just like HEX. Yeah, that's a great idea. That's a very good idea.
Trying to persuade any politicians, anybody at all, to do this was a total no-go. Everybody agreed it was a fantastic idea. Nobody wanted to actually stand up and do it. So, same. Part of the reason is that we were talking to the state government, and HEX is a federal government project. Federal government aren't interested in talking to anybody from Perth, and state government weren't interested in doing a project that they couldn't get behind and stand up and take credit for. So, yeah, it was a no-go. But yeah, it's like, if you want to do something with government, that's what to do.
It's a brilliant idea.
It's a great idea. I agree. Yeah. It's enough for you to like run with an idea, bring it to market, without worrying about the rest of life getting in your way. That's enough to just push everything along. I wish I could see it happen.
And that's why some people go on incubators, right? Because they might get 20 or 50 grand, and it allows them to quit their full-time job and jump in for a 6-month incubator. And I think +8 is probably the best version of that is running at the moment, because they do actually provide. I think Derek Gerard's mixed it up a bit this year, but you actually go and pitch halfway through the incubator for between 20 and 100 grand. It's not just everyone gets 40. And he's got, I think he brought so many companies on, is now down to 15, and those 15 are going to pitch to be the final 8. They're going to get between 20 and 100. And I think that's quite a nice way of doing it.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Yeah, I like that.
I literally have a board meeting.
I was going to say, we got like 10 minutes left.
Sorry.
So let's jump to my the fun question we were going to end on, which is, if you were a billionaire, if you were Jeff Bezos' billionaire, how would you support the startup community in Perth? Would you support the startup community in Perth? What would you do? What would you set up? We have to keep it quick. It's just a silly question, but I think it's a good one to end on. Yeah.
So for me, I'd do HEX for startups. I would give away free loans of about 50K over 2 years, as structure it as a loan, charge some admin fee, blah blah blah. I have a whole plan.
Great idea.
I haven't actually written it down yet, but I have a whole plan in my head for when I'm rich and successful and come back to Perth. I go, right, let's fucking do this.
You should write it on Startup News.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I would educate investors. get high net worths in a room, make it a really cool environment.
Yeah.
To be in the room, you get great networking. I would meet at the palaces in Peppermint Grove and Cottesloe, and that would be part of the advantage of the people you meet and places you go. And we'd talk about startups and we'd educate them on fintech and educate them on this. Wouldn't have pitch nights necessarily, educate them about the capital gains exemptions, the tax returns, all the stuff that's available, why part of your portfolio should go to the next generation, and do it for WA.
Yes.
Right? Give back. It's part philanthropy, but do it.
Yeah.
But it's a portion of your portfolio. And have some fun. And then you can talk about that little startup you've invested in. You know? People like to chat about the junior mining stock they've invested. I invested in a little startup the other day. What's it do? It does AI. What does that stand for?
Tinder for dogs.
That's out there. That was one of the pitches in Startup West many years ago, wasn't it? Tinder for dogs. I think
Startup West. We should do Startup West again.
We are. It's a podcast. So to give us a plug there.
Yeah,
it's another podcast in Perth. Repurposed, pivoted.
Yes.
I think for me, I would love to see some non-uni tech playgrounds in terms of some tech labs. I'd love to see some hardware labs. Yeah, like just free-for-all playgrounds where there is software tech, hardware tech, all sorts of things happening that people can come in and just play. Maybe things come out of it, maybe things don't. But I would like to see an encouragement of international tech firms or people coming back into Perth, and we know that they come home to roost and have families. Love to see us have the facilities for people that are probably used to a lot more things around to come back here and have some playgrounds. I love that. I'd go and play in them all day.
There's a few makerspaces at the moment, but I imagine like more like that.
Larger, like
not just space, but equipment and stuff and tech and laptops and software and people to run things and 3D printing, just the whole gamut of all the tech, so people could come in and just let their imaginations run free.
Yeah.
Yep. Because I do like the ideas, people, Marcus, as you know. And so I'd love to see people to sort of play and see what tech can do, and then see some things form out of it, just without any objective to make something specific. Just
I'm going to be wholly unoriginal and just say I'll do those 3 ideas.
All of them.
I think they combine into a very interesting idea.
We basically sorted it all out in an hour.
Yeah, it's solved.
So, but going back to Startup West, I think one of the other things that needs to happen in the Perth scene is a regular piss up. Like
yes.
The original Startup West piss up in a brewery was just so awesome, and we never managed to do it again. Oh, it's my lasting regret. Well, sorry, we never managed to do it again. Yes, we did it once more, and it was a great success.
Yeah, at its finest.
Let's schedule that for post COVID then, because I'll be there. Yeah. Yeah. All right. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Patrick, for bringing along Charlie and Marcus.
It's good to catch up with them all again too.
This is a really, really interesting chat. I'm kind of sad that we're ending it, because I could talk about this stuff for hours and hours.
We could do a part 2 sometime.
Right.
Yeah. That's it. No, good. Thanks for having us on board, and hope you can keep it up.
Cool. No worries, guys. Well, until next time.
Yeah.
Stay safe.
Cool.
Thanks, Patrick.
Cheers.
Thanks, Charlie.
You.
Thanks, Marcus.
Good to see you, Marcus. Cheers, Alex.
Be safe in these challenging times.
See you.
See ya.
Bye.
You've reached the end of another episode of the Tech Society podcast. Connect with us at techsociety.fm. Make sure you subscribe to our newsletter to receive updates. And remember that Tech Society airs every Friday, so make sure you tune in next week. This podcast is brought to you by our sponsor, Ninja Software.